I'll never forget the sound of that wind. It came out of nowhere, like a freight train charging through the pines. One moment the air was still, the campfire smoke rising straight as a candle's flame, and the next, the forest itself seemed to roar to life. The tent walls bowed inward, snapping back like sails under full wind. I remember glancing at my buddy Luke, who froze halfway through skewering a marshmallow, his eyes as wide as mine. "That doesn't sound good," he muttered, and then, crack, a tree limb somewhere behind us gave way with a sound like thunder. We'd set up camp that afternoon by a lake in the Smoky Mountains, not far from a trailhead that hardly anyone used that late in the season. It had been warm for October, almost too warm, and we were eager to squeeze in one last weekend under the stars before the weather turned. The sky had been a perfect blue when we arrived, and the forecast, which we'd checked on a paper bulletin back at the ranger station, called for nothing worse than a chance of showers. But nature, as I've learned over the years, doesn't much care about forecasts. As the wind howled harder, the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees in minutes. I grabbed the tent stakes, checking each one by hand, but the soil had softened from earlier drizzle, and they shifted with every gust. The smell of wet earth and pine needles filled the air, sharp and heavy. Lightning began to flash in the distance, turning the lake silver for an instant at a time. Luke was already stuffing loose gear into dry bags, yelling over the growing racket, "We should move to the car!" But the car was half a mile down the trail. Between us and it was open ground, and I wasn't keen on being the tallest thing around when the sky was hurling electricity. We made the call to hunker down. It wasn't brave exactly, just the least bad option. We ducked into the tent, zipped everything tight, and braced our backs against the poles. The wind hammered us like fists, each gust stronger than the last. Outside, branches cracked and leaves turned to a million tiny missiles. The rain came next, at first a patter, then a deluge so fierce it drowned out everything else. The sound of it on the nylon was deafening, like standing under a waterfall. I remember the scent of ozone, sharp deck of damp playing cards, like leaves in a gale. I lunged for the flap, trying to grab it, but the wind slapped it back in my face. Luke was shouting something I couldn't hear, and I only caught the motion of his arm pointing towards the trees, his face lit for a heartbeat by another lightning flash. The tent was losing its shape, bending under the force. One of the corner poles popped free from the grommet and jabbed me in the shoulder. The reins stung like needles. "Grab the ridgeline!" I yelled, though my voice was swallowed by the wind. I crawled towards the center pole, clutching at the nylon. My hands slipped on the wet fabric as the storm ripped at it again. The pole gave a metallic groan and snapped clean in two. That was it. The tent collapsed on top of us. For a moment, everything went black as the walls folded down, pressing against our backs. I could feel the poles shifting under the weight of the water, the air thick with the smell of wet nylon and mud. "Out!" Luke's voice came muffled from beneath the mess, and I didn't argue. We wriggled our way free, emerging into a world of chaos. The rain was coming sideways, cold and hard, and the trees were thrashing like they were alive. The lake, just beyond the clearing, looked angry, whitecaps rolling under the flashes of lightning. Every instinct screamed to run for cover. But where? We grabbed what we could, our headlamps, the waterproof bag with our food, and stumbled towards a cluster of boulders near the tree line. The ground was slick, turning to mush under our boots. I nearly went down twice before reaching the rocks, and by then my heart was hammering so hard it drowned out everything else. We crouched there, soaked to the bone, trying to shield ourselves behind the biggest stone we could find. The storm had a rhythm to it, almost like breathing. It would roar with all its might for a few moments. Rain, wind, thunder in a single overwhelming pulse. And then pause. just long enough to make you think it was easing up. Then it would hit again, harder. I counted the seconds between lightning and thunder, like I always do in a storm. 5 seconds, 3, 2. The strikes were getting closer. Settling in. And we were trapped right in the middle of it. For what felt like an hour, though it could have been 10 minutes, we crouched behind that boulder, waiting for the storm to decide our fate. The wind screamed through the trees, bending them to impossible angles. Each gust brought with it the sharp scent of pine resin and wet soil. When lightning flashed, the forest lit up like a negative photograph. White trunks, black sky. Everything trembling in that frozen second before the world went dark again. The thunder that followed wasn't a single boom anymore, but a rolling, continuous growl that seemed to come from inside the earth itself. I felt the cold deep in my bones. Water streamed down my sleeves, pooled in my boots, and dripped from the end of my nose. My hands were trembling, though whether from the chill or from nerves, I couldn't say. Luke leaned close, shouting over the wind, "We can't stay here! That oak behind us could come down!" He was right. The sound of cracking wood was too close, too frequent. The trees were no longer just shelter. They were potential weapons, ready to fall without warning. I scanned the clearing through the rain and spotted a darker shape among the trees. A low rock outcrop that jutted from the hillside like the hull of a buried ship. It was maybe 30 yards away, half hidden by ferns and brush. "There!" I yelled, pointing. Luke squinted through the downpour, then nodded. We counted to 3 and made a dash for it. The mud sucked at our boots, each step a battle. Twice I slipped and caught myself on my hands, the taste of wet earth in my mouth. A branch whipped across my shoulder, leaving a sharp sting. The rain was blinding now. It felt like running through a waterfall. When we finally reached the rocks, we found a shallow hollow just big enough for the 2 of us to crouch under. It wasn't much, but it kept the wind off and most of the rain out. We huddled there, panting, trying to catch our breath. The smell of wet moss and stone filled the air, strangely comforting in all that chaos. For the first time Eventually, the lightning started to drift north, flashes becoming fewer, the thunder rolling further away. The rain, though, it didn't stop. It just softened into a steady, relentless pour. For the first time since the tent went down, I let myself breathe. Luke gave a shaky laugh, the kind that's half relief, half disbelief. "Guess we're still here," he said. I nodded, wiping water from my eyes. Yeah, still here. But deep down, I knew we weren't out of it yet. The storm might have passed, but the mountain wasn't finished with us. When dawn finally broke, it didn't so much arrive as seep in, grey and heavy, like the sky itself was exhausted. The rain had eased to a fine drizzle, and a low mist hung among the trees. Every branch dripped steadily. The forest, ticking with the sound of water falling from 1,000 leaves. My back ached from sleeping half sitting against the rock, and when I moved, my jacket made that miserable squelch that only soaked gear can make. Luke stirred beside me, bleary-eyed and shivering, his hair plastered flat to his forehead. Neither of us said much at first. We just listened to the world breathing again. Our little clearing was a different place now. The ground that had been covered with pine needles and dry leaves was churned to mud. The lake, normally calm and mirror-like, had risen several feet overnight and swallowed half the shoreline. Pieces of our tent were scattered everywhere, one pole lodged in the roots of a tree. The fly sheet, caught up in a bush, fluttering like a defeated flag. The smell of ozone had faded, replaced by that clean, earthy scent that only comes after a storm. We started gathering what we could salvage. The sleeping bags were hopeless. Each one weighed as much as a full pack. Luke found his mug half buried in the muck and held it up with a grin that looked more like disbelief than joy. "Guess we're roughing it for breakfast," he said. I laughed, though it came out more as a cough. We shared a handful of soggy granola from a dry bag that had miraculously stayed sealed. It tasted like cardboard, but at that moment, it felt like a feast.
Extra gadgets. None of it mattered. Just being able to stand up, stretch, and take a deep breath of clean air felt like a victory. We crossed the first wash carefully, using a downed branch as a pole. The water was ice cold, numbing our ankles instantly. Every few feet, I tested the ground ahead, wary of soft spots. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds yet, no insects, just the faint hiss of drizzle on the leaves. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. As we climbed higher toward the ridge, the fog began to lift, revealing patches of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Steam rose from the wet earth, curling through the trees in ghostly wisps. I paused for a moment, looking back at the lake glinting through the mist. From up there, it almost looked peaceful again, like nothing had happened. But the broken trees and twisted tent told the truth. We'd survived the night, but the storm had left its mark, both on the land and somewhere deep inside us. By mid-morning, the sun had managed to push through in patches, throwing golden light across the wet forest. The world steamed and sparkled, every drop of rain catching the light like glass. It was beautiful in that raw, unfiltered way nature can be. Beautiful and humbling all at once. We followed what was left of the trail, boots sucking against the soft earth, weaving through fallen branches and small pools that had formed in every hollow. It was slow going, but with each step, the tension that had gripped us through the night began to ease. The storm had passed, and with it, the fear that comes when you realize just how small you are out there. When we finally spotted the glint of metal through the trees, my old truck waiting at the trailhead, it felt almost surreal. We looked at each other and laughed. The kind of laughter that comes not from humor, but from pure relief. My legs were shaking as we reached it. Not from weakness, but from the release of everything we'd been holding inside. Luke tossed his pack into the bed, leaned against the tailgate and said, "Well, that was fun." I laughed again, shaking my head. Yeah. That night, long after I'd unpacked what little survived, I sat on my porch and listened to the distant rumble of thunder over the mountains. Just a faint echo of what we'd faced. It made me smile, not from arrogance, but from respect. Nature doesn't owe us safety or comfort. It offers beauty, yes, but on its own terms. You learn that lesson the hard way sometimes, crouched under a slab of rock, praying the storm spares you. Every time I pitch a tent now, I take a moment to look around. The slope of the land, the trees above, the way the clouds move. I double-check every stake, tie every knot, and whisper a quiet thanks to whatever force kept us safe that night. Because out there, under the open sky, you realize survival isn't about strength or skill. It's about humility, patience, and a healthy respect for the wild. And when the next storm comes, and it always does, I'll be ready. Or at least, ready enough.